Last night, thousands of people crammed into the heart of Sydney to protest against the radical Greens abortion bill. And meanwhile, moments before the rally took place, AAP Fact Check, who had been scrambling to produce this fact check for nearly a month, released its verdict to discredit the entire event. Why are they so desperate? And what did their fact check find? And that's today on the Dr. Joe Show. So thank you everybody who's been watching and supporting the show. We've just hit the 7,000 mark, which is incredible. If you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button to make sure that you are up to date and you get all of the alerts about this channel. As I showed you in a recent video, just 2 days ago, I told you that this was going to happen. I mean, it's not that hard to predict because the left has a playbook and they always pull from it. And I explained to you how just a little while ago, AAP had wanted to do a fact check on my claim that late-term abortion is never medically necessary. They never published that fact check without any transparency or accountability. It just disappeared, presumably because when they looked into it, they found out that I was right. And they couldn't even find a single one of their pro-abortion experts to explain why I was wrong. So that fact check never saw the light of day because AAP couldn't possibly publish a fact check explaining that I was right. Recently, they approached me again to do a fact check on my claims around the Radical Greens abortion bill. We've been waiting with bated breath for nearly a month to see this fact check, and it landed just moments before the rally in an attempt to discredit the rally, I think, and also to sort of shut down this genuine community uprising and opposition to this very radical Greens bill. We're having a massive impact through our uprising. Just yesterday, there were thousands. We weren't expecting that. I don't think the politicians were expecting that. I've already been receiving informal feedback through back channels from politicians saying they could hear the chanting in the chamber. And as we were chanting, "Stop the Greens, Mins must act, kill the bill," they could hear this and they couldn't even proceed with their debate at points because the chanting was so loud. It was so interesting. During the rally, so many of the members of parliament came out on the balcony to take a look. And in fact, the press gallery, who hadn't intended to turn up to the rally, they also filtered out. And there were many journalists there looking and seeing what was going on, curious to see why thousands of people had turned up on a topic that the media hadn't even reported on. We're having such a massive impact in this campaign against the bill that it had become imperative for the left-wing establishment, for Cone and her cronies at AAP Fact Check, to do this, to try and discredit what we've been talking about. So we've been waiting with bated breath for this fact check to be released, and I think they have been scrambling genuinely to try and find an angle, trying to find some experts who they could possibly line up to say that I was wrong in some way, shape or form. And now that it has been released and I've had time to process it, what I can tell you is that it's every bit as false and fabricated and disingenuous as we thought it would be. I told you in my YouTube video 2 days ago that it would be a stitch up, that they would line up pro-abortion experts to substantiate their verdict that I'm not telling the truth. And that's exactly what they've done. It's almost like they watched the video so that they could work out what to do. Let's take a look at the 3 claims in their fact check and the experts that they line up and go through them one by one. The first claim in the fact check is that the bill does not contain any mechanism to enforce compliance by the few Christian and Catholic hospitals classified as public health organisations. So they actually write this as fact in the fact check. So it's not in inverted commas, it's not a quote from an expert, but they just say the bill has no mechanism to enforce compliance with a directive by the Minister for Health that they must perform abortions. Now, interestingly, this exact quote, so this exact line, there is no mechanism in the bill to enforce compliance, that's actually verbatim from Amanda Conn, the abortionist, the slimy politician who introduced this radical bill into the parliament. She has been saying that. If you look at this newspaper article that was published well before this fact check, that is what she has been saying. So it's almost like they've taken Amanda Conn's talking point and they've just inserted it into their so-called fact check as a fact. Let's look at what the bill actually says rather than Amanda Conn, who's not a legal expert and indeed has a vested interest in selling her bill. So in Schedule 1 of the bill, and I feel like I've been going through this on the show with you so many times, so you probably know it better than AAP Fact Check and certainly Amanda Conn. Schedule 1 clearly says that if the Minister for Health gives a directive to a public health organisation, that health organisation must comply. And those words must comply are in the bill itself. AAP had the temerity to fact check me on the basis that they're saying, well, there's no mechanism in the bill. There's nothing to force the closure of these hospitals. But what do they think will happen? AAP doesn't give an example because they don't know what will happen. They don't have a crystal ball. What they're hypothesizing is that the Minister for Health will tell a public health organisation, you must perform an abortion, you must perform abortions. And what AAP is somehow thinking is that public health organisation, the hospital, will turn around and say, well, we don't want to do that. And then the Minister for Health is going to do nothing. I mean, the bill itself literally makes this mandatory. It's not a discretionary clause. It's a mandatory clause. It says that the recipient of that order, the hospital, must comply. And AAP would have you believe that, oh, well, there's no mechanism in the bill to force the closure of these hospitals. Well, in their scenario, what do they think the Minister for Health is going to do if the hospital disobeys their authority and disobeys a direct order that they have legislative power to give? And the interesting thing is they don't actually say what they think was going to happen. They have the hide to say that I'm wrong. They want to fact check me, but they don't actually have the facts themselves about what happens when a public health organisation doesn't comply with a mandatory directive from the Minister for Health. And so, what they do is they line up their experts, don't they? They're pro-abortion experts. And let's take a look at the 3 experts that AAP Fact Check uses to discredit me and our campaign. They use Dr. Christopher Rudge, a lecturer at the University of Sydney Law School, who says that the minister doesn't have the power to shut down the hospital and that the bill is in fact so weak that it only gives the power to the minister to write a letter. Now, I have no idea where he's pulling this letter from. It's not in the bill itself. There's nothing about a letter in the bill. It seems to be a thought bubble of Dr. Rudge's. Like, it literally in the bill itself, it doesn't say, well, if the hospital doesn't comply, then the minister can write a letter. That is not what it says. It's a blanket power, and the bill is silent about what happens next if the directive is not complied with. And I'll get to what will happen in a minute. We've got actual recent evidence that the fact check doesn't include. So Dr. Rudge says there's a letter. He makes it sound like a very innocuous thing. But what if the letter, when the hospital doesn't comply, so let's imagine St Vincent's Public Hospital in Sydney doesn't want to provide abortions because they're a Catholic hospital, it's antithetical to their idea of healthcare. So they turn around and they say, we can't comply with your order, Minister. He could write them a letter, but the letter conceivably could say, well, you're not wanting to provide abortion, so I'm going to remove your source of funding, which is effectively shutting them down. They cannot exist. Their business model will be over if they can't receive public funding. And indeed, this is exactly what Labor and the Greens have done in Canberra when the ACT government wanted Calvary Public Hospital, a Catholic hospital that receives public funding. They wanted Calvary to do abortions and government-assisted suicide. Calvary said no. The Greens and Labor government forcibly acquired Calvary Hospital. So, for Dr. Rudge to say, oh, they're just going to write a letter, it's a really, really weak provision. Well, under what basis? In what universe? The question is, what is in this letter? It's not about the fact that they can write a letter, which, by the way, in the bill doesn't actually say, but presumably if he does write a letter, if the Minister for Health does write a letter to St Vincent's, what's in the letter is surely more important than the fact that he can write a letter itself. And see, this is the thing. This is all about statutory interpretation. This is what the law is about. This AAP fact check, which presumably lines up these 3 experts against me, this is why we have the law. This is why we pay lawyers. Lawyers exist because there is no one correct interpretation of the law. The law is literally just words on a piece of paper that have been passed by 2 houses of parliament. A bill then becomes an act. Then different people will disagree with how to interpret that act. And so then lawyers are paid a whole lot of money to go to court and fight it out. And even the court itself can't always determine what is the truth, what are the facts on this law. And so they're trying to interpret this statute, but there's levels of appeal all the way up to the High Court. So for AAP fact check, for this random Sophia, who's a so-called journalist, to say, we have fact checked Dr. Joanna Howe and she is wrong, based on the opinion of 3 legal experts, when I'm a legal expert myself, I mean, it just doesn't add up. What they're clearly doing here is an overreach to try and discredit my claims. And let's take a look at the experts that they mentioned. So I've talked about Dr. Christopher Rudge. Well, he is not a neutral observer in this. When you look at his bio, he does research into embryonic stem cell research. So let's take a look at a recent tweet by Christopher Rudge. So he said, research using human embryonic stem cells is prohibited. Yes, there are ethical considerations, but the blanket ban would set back regenerative medicine decades. So Christopher Rudge has a vested interest in killing human embryos. He has a vested interest in dehumanizing human beings at the embryonic stage of life. So he has an interest in taking me down as someone that is anti-abortion and calls out abortion as killing human beings from the moment of fertilization until birth. Christopher Rudge is not a neutral observer. And just to be clear, he's a lecturer. He's literally at the start of his academic career. I was a lecturer 15 years ago, but since got promoted to senior lecturer, associate professor, and now to the highest rank of professor. How come AAP Fact Check thinks that this lecturer is a so-called expert and the neutral, objective, verdict maker on the claims that I'm making on this bill? And then let's look at the next claim that they make and the next expert they roll out, because guys, it gets even more ludicrous. So the second thing that they do in this fact check is to line up experts to say that even though the bill technically gives the Minister for Health the power to order a public health organisation to perform an abortion, it's unlikely that the minister would ever use this power. For example, they quote the aforementioned Christopher Rudge, who says there would never be any reason for the minister to direct these extremely few Christian hospitals to do anything. And then they introduce a new researcher from Queensland University of Technology, Casey Hanning, and they refer to her as a research expert. And she says that while the bill gives the minister the power to make directions, it did not give further context to the nature of those directions. And she says, I'd suggest the likelihood of the minister issuing any form of direction to religious hospitals in these cases is slim. So who is Casey Hanning, you might be asking? Well, she's a PhD student. She's not even a lecturer. She hasn't even got an academic job. She's literally a student. She's not a doctor of law, let alone a lecturer of law, let alone a professor of law. I mean, as part of my day job, I supervise PhD students. The reason they have a supervisor is because they need supervision. And Casey Hanning isn't a neutral participant in this debate, just like Christopher Rudge, who has a vested interest in making sure that we can experiment and kill human embryos. Let's have a look at some of the articles that Casey Hanning has been writing. For example, she published in the Monash University Law Review, Abortion Law in Australia, Conscientious Objection and Implications for Access. That was in 2022. And a year later, she published in the Women's Studies International Forum with some of the most pro-abortion academics in the country. She published The Institutional Lottery, Institutional Variation in the Processes Involved in Accessing Late-Term Abortion in Victoria, Australia. Casey Hanning is an activist who wants to see more abortion in Australia. She's not a neutral observer. These pieces, these academic articles are not objective analyses of the state of play with regards to abortion law. No, they're written by pro-abortion academics, groups of them, in fact, who are using these academic articles to push the case to erode conscientious objection for individual health workers and also for institutions. They're coming after Catholic hospitals. For all we know, Casey Hanning is one of the experts that Amanda Conn, the abortionist turned politician, used as her reference group to draft this bill. Like, there's no transparency about how AAP Fact Check got these experts, how they lined them up. Presumably, my best guess is that Con talked to her pals at AAP Fact Check and they asked her, which academics should we talk to? And so, they get Rudge and now they get Casey Hanning. And Casey Hanning is also so into a culture of death in our country that her PhD topic is about government-assisted suicide with respect to people with dementia. And I haven't read her PhD because it's not published yet. She hasn't finished it. But I'm presuming, given that she's at QUT Law School, which has a group that has been some of the most aggressive in pushing government-assisted suicide in this country, presumably Casey Hanning's thesis is about the fact that people with dementia should be able to kill themselves via the government-assisted suicide program. Never mind the fact that the capacity consent may be quite limited given they've got dementia. And in response to this ludicrous claim by Rudge and Hanning that, the Minister for Health might technically get the power under the bill to order Catholic hospitals to perform abortions, but look, he's not likely to use it. Well, my response would be, take it out of the bill. Why is it in the bill in the first place if it was never intended to be used? Why give the minister such a draconian power, such a absolute power to force Catholic hospitals? They must comply. Why give it to him if it's not intended that at some point down the road, maybe it's not today, maybe it's not tomorrow, but why give him that power if he's not going to use it? It leaves Catholic hospitals in a very vulnerable position if this power could be used against them And yet AAP Fact Checks thinks it's okay to use an activist student as the basis for saying that I'm lying. The third claim that they make is that the bill alters the rights of doctors to conscientiously object to abortion, but that it doesn't remove their freedom of conscience altogether. However, a key component of this bill is that it removes the right of doctors to hand a patient a list. So at the moment in New South Wales, if a woman goes to a GP and she wants to kill her baby, she wants to get an abortion, the GP can say, look, I have a conscientious objection, so I can't participate. Here's a list of available services. And then it's up to the patient, up to the woman to then call around and work out what she's going to do. This is already terrible. It should never have happened. This is already an encroach on freedom of conscience. But what the Con bill does, what Amanda Con's bill does, is it says you can't give a list anymore. You actually have to actively transfer your patient to another health practitioner that you reasonably believe will carry out the abortion. It's a big difference. In one example, you're just handing a list over. In the other example, you are literally calling to arrange the killing of that child, and it makes you morally complicit. This is a gross erosion of freedom of conscience. And for AAP Fact Check to just whitewash it as if it's nothing exposes the pro-abortion bias that is ridden through this fact check. And then the final expert that they use in this fact check is Professor Angela Dawson. So well done to them. They found themselves a professor. But she is not a neutral participant either. Just like the lecturer and the activist PhD student, Angela Dawson is a professor who has built up her work around abortion access. This is one of the main areas that she publishes in. It's clear on her bio that she wants to further abortion access in this country. She wants more abortion. She is about removing institutional barriers for women accessing abortion. So she's a key proponent of the Cohen bill. She's not a neutral observer. So what they've done, guys, is they've said, oh, well, Dr. Joanna Howe, she's an anti-abortion researcher and activist. So she's not neutral. And we need to find, actual experts who don't have a vested interest to check whether she's telling the truth or whether she's lying. But what they've done in practice without telling you that they've done this, because nowhere in the fact check do they point out that any of their three so-called experts have anything but an objective position. They never tell you. They never tell you that Professor Dawson has built a career advancing the issue of abortion access. They never tell you that Casey Hanning is an activist PhD student who wants to further abortion in this country. They never tell you that Christopher Rudge is someone who wants to experiment on human beings at the embryonic stage of life. That is absent from this so-called fact check. And so what they've done is, under the veneer of objectivity and with the title of fact check, they've used it to stitch me up and to erode our voice and to discredit us. But here's the clincher. The reason they go to all this trouble is because this fact check is then weaponized to censor my voice and your voice. And this is how they do it. It's because they have a deal with Meta, who owns Facebook and Instagram. And when AAP does a fact check, Meta uses it to then censor the voices of people like you and me who AAP fact check has found to be untrue. Now, remember when Trump got elected, Mark Zuckerberg did this big thing because he was kissing up to Trump about how he was all for free speech now because Vance and Trump are all for free speech, and how he was going to remove fact-checking and censorship from Facebook platforms. He said, we're all about the free interplay of information. But as it turns out, that was only for the US. Zuckerberg doesn't love free speech so much that he's removing these fact checkers from everywhere else. So in Australia, Instagram and Facebook have a deal with AAP Fact Check. It's become clear that Zuckerberg's commitment to free speech is not like Elon Musk's commitment to free speech. This was literally just about kissing up to the new administration. So within moments of the AAP Fact Check landing just before the rally, anybody that wanted to share my posts on social media got this message. Let's take a look at a comment from someone who tried to share one of my posts on Facebook and got this message. I shared your video that you posted yesterday on my personal Facebook page on the upcoming abortion bill, and it came up this morning that I was sharing false information. How absolutely wrong and ridiculous. So that happened on Facebook. When Anushka tried to share one of my posts on Instagram, this is the notification she got. It said, Instagram has added a notice to your post and moved it lower in your feed. This basically is shorthand for saying we're not going to let people see it. Because if something's lower down on the feed, then people have to scroll to actually get to it. Check what happened when I tried to share something to my story about the bill. It says, partly false. Third-party fact checkers say that information in this post is partly false. Learn more. And when you click on the Learn More button, it takes you straight to the AAP fact check. They don't say that this fact check is actually just an opinion piece by 3 academics with a vested interest in killing babies. They don't say that. And so then on social media, the view count and my ability to reach you and your ability to share my post is dramatically curtailed because of this nefarious web between the pro-abortion establishment, AAP fact check, and these large tech companies who want to censor our voice. We thought we defeated this in this country when we defeated the misinformation bill because the Albo government wanted to set up a government department, a government ministry of truth who would fact check our claims. But it seems like Meta is doing this anyway. So where does this leave us? The good news is we had thousands turn up to the rally last night, and that was with less than a week's notice. People power is working. This morning at the letterbox drop, there were 35 people that travelled all the way to Leppington, which is like an hour and a half out of Sydney, to letterbox that seat. I know that the phone lines to politicians are running off the hook because you guys are calling them. So what I'm going to say to you is this: don't stop sharing. Don't stop writing comments. Tag Elon Musk. Let's see if we can get this story out there and keep calling the politicians, because we are so close to stopping this bill, which is why they want to stop our voice. Thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for watching the show, and I look forward to seeing you next time.